Okay, so the next story we're going to look at today is... Oh, yeah, this one was really interesting because I stumbled across this on accident, really. I don't even know how I found it. But we're in the year... Let's hop in the Carpenter copter. Carpenter copter is actually pretty sturdy. It can handle these time warps. So 2004 is not really a time jump. We just kind of like turn our head slightly and we're back in 2004. But when we're going way back in time, we want the Carpenter copter. We want to ride in style, and it can handle any sort of time warp. So, ding! I don't know where we found that time warp. We were just at the airport, and we slowly lifted off the ground slightly, disappeared back in time. But we are going back in time. We're going back to the year 1871. So when this helicopter appears out of nowhere, everyone's like, oh my god, it's a giant demon. It's super loud. And the pilot looks like he's really terrible at flying that thing, whatever it is. And we land, and we jump out of it. It's a specific date. It's October 8th, 1871. 4 days after my birthday, which would probably matter if I was born 100 years earlier than I actually was. So... we're in 1871. It's October 8th. We're in the Midwest. I think it's the Midwest. It's like Chicago and Michigan and stuff like that. Wisconsin. So that's close. Is Illinois? I think that's more east. But anyways, it doesn't matter. We're in that area. And we land next to a farm. And we go and we see this woman milking a cow. And you guys all know the story. The Great Chicago Fire rushed through the city. It destroyed 3.3 square miles of the city, left 100,000 people homeless, which was 1/3 of the population at that time. 300 people died. It just razed the city. And the kind of joke explanation was the cow kicked over a lantern in Miss O'Leary's barn, and it started the Great Chicago Fire. That was an old nursery rhyme, and I think most people who hear the term Great Chicago Fire are like, oh yeah, the one where the cow kicked it over. Now, apparently the fire, they did say started in that barn, but it didn't have nothing to do with the cow kicking it over. And everyone that got tons of news coverage, and they're like, oh my god, like 3.3 square miles of a major city burned to the ground, 100,000 people homeless, 300 people dead. This is the most horrible fire tragedy that America has faced yet. But we're going to travel just a little bit over to Michigan. Now it's the same day, the Great Michigan Fire. And they're probably like, they don't have internet or television, but they're like, man, I heard something really bad happen in Chicago. I don't know how, but I know it because I don't have a newspaper or a television, but I know it. The Great Michigan Fire spread across 3 cities, 3 different little townships, razed just... That's a machine gun noise, but that's a fire noise. Crackle, crackle. You're like, Jason, I get it. You're quit doing the sound effects. Something's on fire. In Michigan, 3,900 square miles burn. Now, it's not entire city squares, but you would have a city, or a town is probably a better term for it, just... I don't know why I'm doing gunshot noises. Go up. It would cut swaths through forests, just lighting everything up. 500 people or more killed across these 3 communities. And the reason why they go or more is because the place there was a big lumber industry, so you had a lot of lumberjacks there, people moving to that area specifically to cut trees down, and then they would move on. So they don't know how many people died in the forest. They're like thinking it could be higher than 500, because we had people there cutting trees down that weren't members of the community, they're just kind of like migrant workers. So... could be higher than 500. So definitely a bigger fire than Chicago, as far as square miles, and more people died. But the problem was that everyone was focused on Chicago because it was a big city. So the people in Michigan were focused on the fire right in front of them. But nationwide, people are like, oh my god, did you hear about Chicago? And Michigan's like, hey, remember me? They're still like covered in soot. And the people are like, no, did you visit Chicago? Why do you look like you just walked out of a fire? And they're like, ugh. But on the same day as the Great Chicago Fire, as the Great Michigan Fire, in Wisconsin, we're going to hop in the Carpenter copter because we want to go here and visit this place. We want a first-hand account of the Peshtigo Fire. Peshtigo was a community in Wisconsin And it was like this town, I think, is again a good word for it. And it kind of looped around this bay. You had this water thing in the middle of it. A lake is probably the scientific term. The community wrapped around like a horseshoe. On October 8th, 1871, Peshtigo Fire starts. Now, starts out in the field and rapidly grows. And the reason why is there was a cold front coming in, and it created very, very quickly what's known as a firestorm. Now, a firestorm is a very specific scientific term, not just the name of a movie starring Howie Long from the 90s. Firestorm is a very specific scientific term. Superheated flames at least 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So if it's only 1,999, people are like, go back to school. Get to 2,000. But if it's at least 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it has winds of 110 miles per hour or stronger, it can be over that. That is what is considered a firestorm. So it's moving incredibly fast. You can't outdrive that, especially not like a Hyundai or something. You're 110 miles an hour and it's 2,000 degrees. Even if you were in a car that, say, was going 120 miles an hour, by the time you started to put distance between you, your tires would melt. And they didn't have cars back then, so it doesn't matter. They were just totally boned. It torched everything. A fire tornado appeared and hit a train, knocking the train cars over. Now, that might be a little dramatic. The train wasn't moving. It wasn't like, keep going. And it's like, chicka, 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 chicka. And there's like this tornado chasing it. And they're like, we're too close. It was just sitting still. I should have made that specific from the beginning. It was just sitting there. And fire tornado knocked stuff over. Knocked over a train car. Now, 1,875 square miles burned. So bigger than both of them. Wait, was that bigger than both of them? Now I have to double check the Great Michigan one. Oh no, it was smaller than Great Michigan one. Okay, so, but still, first is the worst, second is the best. 1,875 square miles burned. So many people died. They don't know. Their best guess. So in Chicago we had 300, in Great Michigan we had 500. The Peshtigo Fire, between 1,500 and 2,500 people dead. It happened within, like, minutes. You have this huge death toll. Because the fire was moving super fast, and it was just cutting everyone down. And this is the interesting thing. Well, it's not interesting. It's quite dark. So many people died in the fire, there weren't enough people left to identify remains. So they just started throwing them in a big pit. Entire families and neighborhoods and communities, no one was left to say, oh, that's Joey, and that's Margaret, and that's Malcolm, or whatever. There was nobody left to say, oh yeah, I know that guy, because they all needed someone to go, hey, I know that guy, and they were just all burnt to a crisp. Some people said, because there was that water in the middle. Some people go, hey, I got an idea, let's hide in the water. Now, that's a good idea if the flames are coming. But it was also October in Wisconsin, so some people jumped in the water and they survived, but other people died of hypothermia. I talked about that on a previous episode about ghost boats, where the boat was on fire on one end and it was covered in ice on the other end and it was going down the Tallahatchie or whatever. That you had your choice, you could either burn or freeze to death. And that was the same thing here. You could jump in the water and risk freezing to death, or you could stay on land and it was a 100% chance of burning. Now, there was one anecdotal story. A young girl saw a cow jump in the water, and so she jumped on the cow and held onto its horn until the fire passed. I think that story's totally fake, because I don't know how good swimmers cows are. Plus, I'm a little iffy whether or not cows have horns. Anyways, they might, but I don't think they're strong swimmers. I don't think that is a skill that cows are normally known for. Now, this was tragedy, obviously, and there's not a lot of funny stuff in a tragedy. However, I did read a story about a man. His neighborhood went up in flames. His house went up in flames, and he ran into the smoke to save his wife. He doesn't slip on a banana peel. It's not that type of funny, but that actually would be pretty funny too. But he runs into the smoke to save his wife. He grabs her, he picks her up, he runs out of the smoke, he runs down the street, he gets away from the fire, looks down, it's not his wife, it's another random woman, and he began wailing because he knew that meant that his wife died in the fire. Now, that sounds like something you would see on a Looney Tune. Bugs Bunny runs, well, there's no Looney Tunes where a giant fire kills everybody, but Daffy Duck runs into a house to go rescue... Does he have a girlfriend? Well, it's Danny Duck. And instead he runs out and he's holding Bugs Bunny in a wig and he hears the horrible cries of Danny Duck dying in the flames. And then they cut to just a roasted duck sitting on a plate and he's wailing. I call BS on that story too. It sounds horrible, but I call BS because how would that story be related to anybody? Either the guy is sitting at a bar and he's like, yeah, the biggest regret of my life. One day I ran into a burning building and saved the wrong woman. And the other people at the bar would be like, well, yeah, that's kind of sad, but you saved a human life. So he wouldn't tell that story. I don't think the woman would tell that story because then she'd be like, yeah, one day I got saved, but he saved the wrong woman. I should have burned horribly in that fire. And I don't think a bystander would have not known what was going on. So there's really no one to relay that story. I think it's, again, anecdotal. But another note, before I get on to the conspiracy theory, because I'm not just going to talk about people dying horribly in fires, the government, so everyone was more focused on Chicago, but the U.S. government studied the Peshtigo Fire. And they said, how can we make this fire happen artificially as a weapon of war? So they studied wind patterns and they studied burn stuff. They're like rubbing charcoal between their hand and they're like, yep, okay, now I know how to build a perfect weapon. They're like, seriously, dude? You just rub some charcoal between your hands. He's all tasting it. Yeah, let's go to the lab. So anyways, when they started building incendiary bombs, they looked at the model for Peshtigo to see what would be the best environment to drop them in as far as structures and as far as like weather, what would work best. Because firestorms happen, but they're kind of rare and they're super dangerous. So it's not like you want to be out there in the field studying them. So when they started firebombing Dresden and Tokyo during World War II, they modeled the bombing patterns and stuff like that from what they knew from the Peshtigo Fire. If you can take the power of nature and turn that into a weapon, you're nearly unstoppable. That's something Cobra Commander does. But anyway, so the U.S. government did that. Let's get to the crazy conspiracy thing, though. At the time, again, people focused on the Chicago Fire. And I should also say that Peshtigo Fire, all of their communication devices burned down, so they weren't able to get out the message that, hey, we have this big fire. So, looking back, researchers, armchair scientists, things like that, came up with a theory. They're like, how could you have these huge fires all happening on the same day, starting on the same day, across such a large geographical area? If they were closer, you could say embers from Chicago went to Michigan, and embers from Michigan went to Peshtigo, and there was even more fires in America that day, but none of them hit that level. So people started to come up with a theory. Meteorites. Now, at the same time, there was this comet that used to exist. It's completely dead now. But at the same time, there was a comet that had been flying around. It showed up every 6 years. It was called Biela's Comet. And every time it got back, it got a little more small, broke into two, and then, it broke into even less and stuff like that. But 1871 was when the comet was supposed to come back. Now, they hadn't seen it the past 2 times, I believe, that it had come by. And so scientists were like, oh, it must have completely broken up, because we already knew that it was starting to fragment. But the theory is that chunks of it crashed into Earth. And the pushback and started these fires. It was basically like a shotgun blast of fires hitting across America. The pushback, the scientific community has said, there's interesting because there's a lot of dispute, and then the other people have pretty good arguments. The debunkers are saying, well, meteorites aren't hot when they hit the ground. You can actually walk up and pick one up. Now, that's a lie, because I saw the blob, and you can't touch those rocks. Actually, wait, no, that one was super cold. That's not right, because I've seen other movies where the rocks come down and they're super hot, and they go, ow. Actually, no, even those movies, they go, ow, it's so cold. Anyways, scientists, point one, they come down, they're so cold, I saw the blob, it's too cold to touch. But the pushback, the other guys were saying, the Cometarians will say, they're saying, well, that's true, but it's only cold a millimeter deep. And it's only cold if they're of a certain composition. So we don't know for sure that all of them do this. But the ones that people run up and touch, or the ones that contain blobs, are cold. However, they could be hotter. So the debunkers go, well, comets are ice. So it can't actually fall down and set fires. So another point, debunkers. The Cometarians said, actually,
We know that the Biela comet passed through an asteroid belt and started bringing asteroids with it. And we don't know what those were full of. They said it could have been full of methane, which would be explosive, or this other chemical that I don't remember, started with an ACE, that is also explosive. They said the comet itself may have disintegrated. It may have never shown up to Earth, but it threw these other asteroids at us like a shotgun, and they just hit across America. And people at the scene of the fires said, preceding the fires, they saw fireballs coming down. Now, I take that with a grain of salt, because they probably had a lot of smoke in their eyes, and really the chances of them like looking up and then seeing a bunch of fireballs coming down, I think probably stuff was on fire, and they may have seen fire stuff, but who knows? Because they don't know why so many fires started on that same day. And what's interesting is a lot of the debunking articles were like, it was really dry. It was a dry season, which is true. But is the month of October well known for having a bunch of fires? I mean, I guess we had all those wildfires in Los Angeles not more than a couple months ago, but I don't know. I think about it. It was cold enough in the water that you could die of hypothermia, but you could also have a massive fire going on the shore. So that's why the temperature thing kind of throws me off. So did the breakup of a comet cause these massive fires? Can it happen again? I don't have the answer for either of those questions, but I think they're interesting questions. And I think it's crazy that all these fires, and again, I just highlighted 3 of them. There were a lot of other minor fires, and in Canada, but there was in multiple states, like I think Iowa had a fire. Like you had this stuff, this big circle. Not close enough that embers could fly from one state to the other, but close enough that if nature took a giant shotgun and filled it full of asteroids and comet bits and just went poof, close enough to do some serious damage. So who knows? We won't know, actually, until it happens again, and hopefully it never does, but we will see. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.